Welcome back to the Means Report. Dr. Craig Albert, the Director of Intelligence and Security Studies at Augusta University, is with us today. Thank goodness, because there's been a lot to talk about. Moving on to the trade wars that could be beginning, these tariffs that we're levying against China and other nations, and they are firing back at us with high fees on our goods and services. Why are we doing this? Is it it feels like it's a short-term thing till one side gets sick of it and we go back to the table and we're friends again. China just seems like somebody you wouldn't want to mess with when it comes to most anything. They're huge.
And that's particularly the reason why President Trump is going after China. If the intel community says that China is our next biggest threat when you come to power projection capabilities. So to break that down, they are the next challenger to us. They have the most likelihood of being able to threaten us if we ever went into a great power war. So we haven't had a great power war since World War II. China is at a position where in the next 20 to 30 years, they could legitimately challenge us. How are they getting the power capabilities to getting in a position where they can challenge us? It's through cyber espionage. They're stealing so much of our data, not just government data, but business data, patent data, design data for everything. President Trump is savvier than most individuals give him credit for. He's not putting tariffs on China just because of the fact that they have a $300 billion surplus over us. So when you trade, we trade with every nation state in the world. You try to have a balance, or if you're really self-interested as a country, you want to have the surplus with another country because that helps your economy out more than having a deficit. We're in the hundreds of billions of dollars of deficit. So he wants to balance that because he thinks that's going to benefit the American economy and, more importantly, the individual consumer. But more importantly, beyond that is a grand strategy of how do we make sure China is not threatening us or they're never put in a position. So one way to combat or punish them for all the cyber espionage that they're doing is to engage in a trade scrimmage. Let's be careful here, a trade scrimmage.
Sure, yeah.
If we break into a trade war, all bets are off, and that's a completely different understanding. The American economy will get hurt, the American consumer will get hurt. Maybe not at first, but in the long run, you're going to see that you're spending several $100s extra a year. That's probably what we're going to see immediately, is that we'll probably spend the average person $80 more a year for things that were made in China. But if it continues and they're threatening to put the exact same amount on us, we could be putting $400 billion of tariffs on each other, which means prices for, let's say, iPhones that are made in China and shipped back over here, we're going to have to pay a tariff on that. Who's going to eat that cost, Apple or the consumer? The consumer's going to eat it.
Well, so my question is the hope, and I hate to oversimplify it, but it's really the purpose of you being here today is to try to oversimplify. Is the hope here that one day China says, you know what, we're going to stop stealing so much of your stuff in cyberspace? These tariffs, enough's enough. We'll stop stealing so much stuff from y'all. Let's just go back to normal.
So it's President Trump as usual with everything he does, and this is his business model, which he's bringing into the presidency. He is taking, as we saw with immigration, as we see with anything, the most hardline position he can think of. He writes about this in all of his books that he's published. This is how he runs his television shows. He takes the hardline position. So therefore, when you're forced to compromise, no matter how you compromise, you're compromising more than what you wanted to bring him from his hardline position. So what his ultimate goal is to benefit the American economy somehow by making that trade deficit at least better, if not altogether, while stopping them from a little bit of cyber espionage. Now, we're never going to stop a country fully from cyber espionage. Cyber offense is much easier than cyber defense, and vulnerabilities are found in the internet each day, and so it's much easier to attack, much easier to steal than it is to defend against all of that. What President Trump is saying is you're going to be punished if you keep doing this at the level, frequency, and intensity that you're doing, and terrorists is one of those ways. Now, let's be clear, because everybody says, a lot of analysts on the news are saying that China would win this trade war. That's not true. If they really went to an all-out trade war, they own a large plurality of American bonds. That means our bond market would crash. And who does that affect negatively in the end? The owner of those bonds, which is China. So if they really go on full-out trade war with us, they're damaging themselves more than they're damaging us. We would win by default because they own more of our bonds than we do of theirs.
The midterm elections that you mentioned earlier are still playing out. But what feel do you have for them right now as far as them being a referendum on President Trump? Are more things going his way, more elections his way than not?
So I think I calculated it. I'm about 63% accurate with my predictions with you in the past couple of years.
We love the predictions.
So, let's see. I would say that nobody knows for sure because the population is in this weird spot where so many people like President Trump, they like his directness, they like his policy, they like his hardline stances, but so many of the population, some of them at the same time, don't like how he handles himself, don't like his character, don't like the presumption of corruption that surrounds the Trump family. Whether it's accurate or not, they're uncomfortable with this. So it depends on who wins that message. Do the Democrats win that message or do the Republicans win that message? Which message do you feel better off today than you were 2 years ago? Do you think America is more secure today than 2 years ago? Is our economy better today than 2 years ago? The one thing I would say is that Democrats are predicting a blue wave, that they're going to kind of sweep and win back the houses of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Right.
I think that's highly unlikely. They might gain a few seats in the House, 10 or 12 maybe. They might win a 2 or 3 seats in the Senate and therefore take control of the Senate. I think the best prediction I can make is that the Democrats might win the Senate, but I do not think they'll control full Congress.
I want to get into this more in depth on a future show, but are more Democrats or Republicans, or can you tell, coming out of your classrooms at Augusta University? What kind of kids are coming out of there?
You all should come to the class and film it sometime and talk to the students. But when I teach, I try as best I can to stay politically objective.
Yeah.
And when a student, whether they're clearly liberal, Democrat, or clearly conservative, Republican, or down the middle, I try to challenge them on whatever their view is. Because I'm trying to create, and I think this is the liberal arts model that Augusta University has, is that we're trying to create productive students that have creative, critical, and analytical capabilities. So it doesn't matter what your position is coming into the class. It's, do you have evidence for that? Can you change your mind based on fact, based on evidence, based on argumentation in the classroom? And when you leave, can you explain why you changed your mind or why you stayed steadfast? And that's what most students are. Some classrooms, the students don't like telling you their political persuasion because it's a big perception that if you disagree with the professor's political viewpoint, you might be hurt in your grades, which is totally unethical, and professors are just not allowed to do that. But students sometimes feel that that happens. So the way I do that to ease them and to make them feel a little bit safer is to say, hey, I don't care what your political objectives are, what your ideology are. I really don't. As long as you have evidence for it and you're open to change, if another student presents evidence that just clearly diminishes your understanding of it, your evidence of it, can you change that and feel comfortable changing them? Because I always tell them, education or being smart isn't being smart up front and sticking to your guns. It's being able to think creatively and critically and admitting when you're wrong and changing your opinion based on that. When somebody disproves you, you have just been brought closer to the journey for the search of truth.
Great
so there's
point.
No sense in holding on.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for fostering that kind of environment for our children. We appreciate you. And thanks for your time today, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Flew by again, and we will have Dr. Craig Albert back soon. I assure you, we value his expertise.